Hey guys, what's up? So today's probably going to be a short video, or shorter than other days, because the 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 topic that I wanted to talk about today is not actually that deep, but hopefully the sound is fixed for today's video. Yesterday's video had a really deep background noise that I couldn't remove because the frequency of that background noise was the same as my voice, so I couldn't remove it with an equalizer. But hopefully today's fixed. I don't actually know until I go edit the video, so I've touched up some things in the recorder, but hopefully it's fixed. Anyways, so yeah, today's topic is going to be what makes a country Western, right? Because people consider or have different ideas, I should say, have different ideas of what Western means or what a Western country is, right? Personally, I consider to be Western basically everything except Africa, the Arabs, so the Middle East, Middle East, Africa, and like sort of Central Asia. That's what I think, and Southern Asia. That's what I think is not Western, and all of the rest of the world I'd consider to be Western, because you have to keep in mind, and this is going to be first. I'm going to give my argument, and then I'm going to discuss other opinions of other people and other reasonings that I've heard for what is Western, what isn't, right? Um, my opinion is that there are two factors for something to be Western. Either it was Western because, or, well, three, I should say three factors, or three ways that something could be Western. Um, the first one is by definition, right? There are places which, by definition, are considered Western, and they are the ones that give the name basically to other places. So basically, Europe. Europe has traditionally been considered the Western world, and by definition, Europe is Western, and therefore other places uh, get that name from Europe, right? And the European culture, obviously. The second way would be by direct uh, by direct inheritance, right? So basically, all of the places that Europe colonized and later on passed their culture onto those places are Western, right? So that would make, you know, the USA, that would be Western by um, derivation, no, by inheritance, yeah, by inheritance. That would be Western by inheritance. And then there's a third way that some people don't consider, which fair enough, but I do consider, which is by, I would say, conversion. Maybe should be the title of the way to consider something Western, or maybe it should be named by integration, or by, I don't know. Anyways, that in that group, I include East Asia, right? Some places like Hawaii, for example, places that Europe hasn't basically uh, really Europe hasn't really maybe they've been colonized by Europe, but not in the same way that uh, Australia has, or Southern America, or Northern America, or America in general, right? Um, there's a difference, right? Maybe we colonized them, but we kind of just used them for resources, and we didn't really care about their culture. And they later on they've become uh, westernized, right? That would be the term. Term would be westernized. And in the case of, places like Japan, they haven't even been colonized ever by Europeans, and yet there's clearly a difference between Japan, for example, and China, right? Especially, places that aren't Hong Kong and all of that, that are, a bit more westernized, but the rest of China isn't, and it's clearly you can feel the difference between one place and the other. And I think that Japan, for example, the Philippines, well, the Philippines actually, it's kind of it's the same. It had the same effect as Southern America, um, because it was basically colonized by the Spanish, and we kind of gave them the same treatment. So I guess the Philippines doesn't count, but um, yeah, I'd say Korea, Japan, maybe. I can't really think of other. Singapore, Taiwan. Yeah, all of these places are Western. I consider them to be Western by integration, right? By Westernization. We haven't actually integrated our culture into them, but they've converted their culture and mixed it with Western culture to become Western, right? So the difference would be in one culture, or in the places that we colonized, that Europe colonized, right? Um, the Western culture became the predominant culture, and then it gathered like bits and pieces of the local culture and integrated into Western culture, and that made it its unique culture, right? And in some cases, more than others. Obviously, the U.S. is 99% Western culture, while, for example, I don't know, Cuba or Puerto Rico or Venezuela are maybe 60-40, or maybe more, like 70-80, but not 99% like the US is, right? So it depends on the place, but the predominant culture is the Western culture. Now, in the case of Westernization, you start, instead of starting with the Western culture and then integrating parts of the original culture, you start off with the original culture, right? The Japanese culture, for example, and then you integrate Western culture into that, and is um, the product is basically a Western culture with basically the same result as colonization, except you started off with the original culture instead of you started off with Western culture and then integrated. the original culture from the place, right? So that's the difference. But you end up basically with the same final product, because if you think about it, Japanese culture really isn't that different, and South Korean culture and you know Philippine culture isn't really nowadays that different from Western culture, from European culture, from US culture. Basically the same with its own. When I say basically the same, I mean, the root is basically the same. Obviously, every place in the world has its own uniqueness and its own, but you can't compare the culture of China to the culture of Japan. It's just non-comparable. The culture of China is, or for example, the Arabs, or India, or Africa, all of these cultures are completely different to Western culture. However, the culture in South Korea, Japan, all these places, Taiwan, they're not that different. They're actually the same, and I consider them to be the same. I consider them to be Western. They became Western through a different process than other places, but they're still Western nonetheless, and that's why I consider them to be Western. Now, there are people that have other arguments. Like I said at the beginning, people don't consider, for example, in this case, people don't consider places that whose culture didn't come directly from Western culture and then evolved into another thing. They don't consider those places to be Western. They only consider, or sorry, I should say, they only consider those places to be Western, and not places that do the opposite, where they start off with a local culture and then they integrate Western culture into it, and therefore they don't consider East Asia Western. They don't consider, other places. In fact, some people consider there to be a limit, right, to how much culture or original culture needs to be in the end product for it to be considered Western. And that's why some people don't consider South America to be Western, because they consider it to have too much of the original culture to be considered pure Western, right? And the thing is, I understand those visions, but at that point, you're basically saying that if you're not a direct descendant from Europe, you're not Western. And I just don't agree with that. I think that you can be non-European and be like it makes no sense. You can be for example, you can be from non-European descent and still be Western in the heart, because you've been raised with the Western culture, and vice versa. You can be of European descent and be in another place, and you can bring the Western culture with you, and you can be of European descent and live in a place where the European Western culture does not exist. So I just don't think that's a reasonable argument. Now the thing is, the European Western world basically comes from Rome, right? Some people say, well, before that it came from the Greeks. I believe that the Greeks did have a pretty good, similar to Roman culture, and I do admit that the Romans gathered pretty much all of their culture from the Greeks, but the Romans are the ones that formed, in my opinion, our our modern understanding of Western culture. They're the ones that ditched the, you know, uh, poly polytheist polytheist religion. I think it's pronounced that way. They're the ones that ditched that for Christianity. They're the ones that built cities that settled the principles that we follow nowadays for cities. They're the ones that wrote the guidelines for our modern understanding of government. They're the ones that basically they're the ones that made Western culture, even though they gathered a lot of culture from the Greeks. In my opinion, it is the Romans and not the Greeks the ones that formed the actual Western culture, our actual modern understanding of Western culture. And so you could say that the Romans are the only true Western, but then that would make basically Scotland not Western, which is stupid, completely stupid and completely dumb to say that Ireland is not fucking Wales is not Western because it never got invaded by the Romans. So it's stupid to say to be a purist when it comes to Westernization, and when it comes to identifying places as Western, because the only true places where Western culture was created was the Roman Empire, which never got to other places, like, for example, Scandinavia. Is Scandinavia not Western? It is fucking northern Germany is not Western. That's just not a reasonable argument. And from that argument, from admitting that Wales is Western to admitting that Japan is Western is, in my opinion, is a small step because it's pretty much the same idea. You got a local culture which integrates Western culture into it, becoming its own unique branch of Western culture, but still Western culture. And yeah, anyways, guys, that's pretty much all. The video did end up being actually quite long, not short at all. I guess I had more to say on this topic than I actually thought. But yeah, that's pretty much my idea of what makes what makes up the Western world. I would definitely want to see a modern Roman Empire or Western Union or whatever, because I do think that what brings us together is much more than what tears us apart. I do think that every country that has Western culture at its core, we have basically everything in common, and stupid things like what kind of clothes are you usually use, or if you take your shoes off before entering a house or not. Those are stupid things, or if you use a bidet or not. Like, all of these things are stupid localization debates that are really not they're really not that much of a difference. We're all just the same, and I would definitely like, I know it sounds like a cliche, but I would definitely like for us to put the differences aside and form a union and be stronger than we are now. Definitely not following the model of the European Union. Because I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I live in the European Union, and I can definitely tell you that the European Union does not work. But anyways, guys, I mean, I really don't like to get into politics, but this isn't even politics. Like 90% of Europeans know that the European Union doesn't really work. Like, it has its advantages. For example, I praise them a lot for the USB-C um, rule that or law that they implemented, forcing every company, every phone company, especially Apple, to use the USB-C as a standard. I think that was a really good move by the European Union, but you know, even a broken clock is right twice a day, so I mean, I just don't really like the European Union, but any other union, I guess I guess that any other union model works. Like, for example, I don't know, the Canadian model or the United Statesian model, or the what other unions are there in the world? There are, sort of countries. Um, there's Canada, there's the US, there's the European Union, there's are there any other unions? Nah, I can't really think of any other ones. Oh, the UAE. I guess the UAE model doesn't really work either because it's a bit monarchical and, well, not a bit, it's completely monarchical, and the Western world doesn't have that model. Well, we do have monarchies, but we've all of us have abandoned monarchical uh, state state management, monarchical state management. Um, so yeah. Anyways, guys, that's all I got to say for today. Um, Bye. That's kind of it. It actually turned out to be quite a long video, so I don't know what I was blabbering on about at the start of the video, saying that this was going to be a short one. It's actually quite a long one. So, anyways, guys, see you.